Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Anne and today I'm going to talk about what I would do if I could only keep 15 of the books on my shelves and if I could only read those 15 books. So no, just keeping 15 and then buying new books or reading from the library. No, these are the 15 books that I would read for the rest of my life. I didn't come up with this idea myself. I saw it on Haley's channel from Haley in Bookland, but she did 30 books. Which 30 books she would choose if she would only be able to keep 30 books. I figured I would make things a little bit more difficult for myself and I chose 15 books. These are in no particular order, these are just how I got them out of my shelves and put them on the table that's right here. But let's get into it. First up there's The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I reread this year, and if you've seen that video you know how much I love this book, how much I adore it. I think it's a very important book. It deals with some very heavy topics like police brutality. If you don't know what this is about a girl called Star who sees her best friend get murdered by a cop right in front of her eyes. And it's about the aftermath of that and how black people are treated in the USA. And it's a very good book. It's very important as well, like I said, but also it's just very well written and it has some very beautiful family dynamics in it, which is one of the things I love most. I love Star's family and it's just a very good book and I think I would want to reread it and keep it on my shelves. It would make me feel sad because it deals with some heavy topics, but it would also make me feel happy because Star's family is wonderful and I love all of the characters. Not all of them, by the way. There are some that could really jump off a cliff for all I care. But that's what makes a good book. Next up there's a very different book. It's the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Mary Ann Sheffer and Annie Barrows. This is a historical novel that's set right after the Second World War and it's about, what's her name? A writer called Juliet Ashton, and she receives a letter from a stranger, a founding member of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. And she's intrigued by what this man tells her because he tells her about this literary society that was set up during the occupation on Guernsey in the Second World War. And so she starts to exchange letters with him and with some of the other members of the society, and she decides to write a book on this society and on the occupation of Guernsey. And eventually she also travels there, but the entire book is told through letters, so it's an epistolary novel. And I always thought I didn't like epistolary novels, that just really wasn't my style, but I absolutely adore this book. I didn't include it in my video of my favorite books of all time, but afterwards when I realized that I'd forgotten this, I was really sad because it really is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it twice now. I actually made a podcast on it with Modern Life Podcast. I think I'm saying that right. I'll leave a link to that down below as well. And it's just a really good novel. It's quite heavy sometimes because it really dives into the occupation and all the horrible things that happened there during the Second World War. And it's really sad at times, but there's also a lot of joy and a lot of relief because the war is now over. There's also some romance there, and I would definitely keep this if I could only keep 15 books. Then there's my favorite children's novel, and that's Matilda by Roald Dahl. I could not go without this book. I have reread it countless times. I think I almost knew this by heart when I was a kid, and it's just a beautiful book about reading, about standing up for yourself, and I adore it. Also, this has beautiful color illustrations. The one I had as a child had the black and white illustrations, but I got this for my birthday a couple of years ago from my parents because they know how much I love this book, and yes, I would definitely keep it. Next up there's a dystopian classic and it's 1984 by George Orwell. I read this for the first time in high school when we all had to read it as a class for English class, and I really enjoyed it then. But when I reread it in 2019, I just came to love it even more, and I realized that this is also up there with my favorite books, even though I didn't include it in that video. I actually made a pretty long video about this in which I go quite deeply into the concepts of 1984 of this dystopian society, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave the link up above. I'm really proud of that video, so I'm just going to put it out there again. This is of course a classic. It's about a man called Winston, and he works in the record department of the Ministry of Truth in this dystopian society. This society basically doesn't allow original thought, independent thought. You have to live by the principles of the party, and if you're not, you're a thought criminal. So even if you think critically about this party, about this society. You're a criminal, and the party keeps tabs on everyone through cameras and microphones. I think this was written in 1949, so the idea of these cameras and microphones, especially the cameras and the flat screen TVs, was very new and very modern, but it's very fun to read that now. And the story is about Winston and how he starts an affair with a woman and how things kind of go downward from there. And I just think this is an absolutely phenomenal work of literature. It's very critical of our society. It's very interesting to read this now because all of these thoughts on a surveillance society are very relevant now, I think. And I think it would be nice to reread this more often and think about all of those subjects. Most of the books I've chosen here are kind of feel-good books or books that bring me comfort. This definitely doesn't bring me comfort, but I think it's interesting to have one of those books in the mix as well. Next up, there's Words in Deep Blue by Kath Crowley. If you follow me for a while, you know that this is one of my favorite books and that I discovered it last year. This is a young adult novel set in Australia, I think, and it's about Rachel and Henry, and it's set just after high school. And Henry's parents own a bookshop, so a lot of the story takes place within that bookshop. There's a lot of reference to books and to specific stories, and I absolutely loved that. But what I love most about this book is Rachel and how she deals with death and with grief. That really spoke to me a lot. At the start of the novel we find out that Rachel has lost her brother in a drowning accident and she's not dealing with that very well. And she hasn't seen Henry for a long time because they used to be best friends, but then Rachel and her family moved away out of the city and they lost contact. But now they're meeting each other again, becoming friends again, and dealing with a lot of stuff from their past. And something in this novel just really spoke to me and really touched me and made me absolutely love it to pieces. It felt very personal to me as well, so there was no doubt about it that this would be within the 15 books. Next up, there's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This came out last year and I read it last year and I absolutely adored it. V.E. Schwab is one of my favorite writers, so I knew I wanted to choose one of her books for this list of 15 books to keep and read forevermore. And this felt like the best book to choose for that. One, because I think it's the only book of hers that's a standalone that I've read, and two, because I think this is very well suited for rereading. This is the story of Addie LaRue, who can live forever. She has struck a deal with a devil type person to simply stop aging and to be able to live forever. But the downside of that deal is that she is not remembered by anyone. As soon as she leaves a room, people forget about her. As soon as a new day starts, people forget about her, which makes for a very hard life and a very lonely life. And she leads that life until she meets Henry, another Henry, and he is able to remember her. And this story was just very beautiful. It also deals with the idea of death, the idea of things ending, which is always something that I'm interested in reading and also kind of scared of reading because I hate that idea. I don't really want to think about it, but somehow reading it in books always comforts me a little. So this is definitely one I would take with me. I love the characters, I love the writing style, I love the story. It was just one that really touched me, just like Words in Deep Blue. Next up, we've got a definite comfort read, and that is Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno. This might come as a bit of a surprise to some people because I don't really talk about this book very much, but I read it last year, in June I think, and I absolutely loved it. This has pretty much all of the things that I love in books. It has some magical realism, it is set by the sea, it is set in a small town with a tight community, it is about family and family relationships and close-knit families, and there is some romance in there as well. It's a wonderful book. It's about Rosa, who believes that she is cursed, or actually everyone in the town she lives in believes that she is cursed because of things that have happened in the past with her mother and her grandmother. They believe that as soon as she falls in love with a boy or starts a relationship with a boy, that boy will then die. So yeah, that's pretty harsh. But this is a very lovely, kind of a coming of age story about Rosa finishing high school, finding out what she wants to do with her life. There is some romance involved. Rosa lives with her grandmother and has a difficult relationship with her own mother. And it was just really wonderful. I loved reading this. I think I gave it 4 stars when I just finished it, but this is definitely a 5-star book for me. And over the past year, I kind of felt like rereading this at multiple points because it was just so wonderful and it just made me feel so happy. So this is definitely a book that I would keep. Next up, there's Chocola by Joanne Harris, which is also a beautiful film, by the way, with Johnny Depp and Juliette Binoche. I think it's won some Oscars. Anyway, I'm getting off track. This is a story about a young woman called Vianne Rocher who arrives in the small French village of Lansquenet-sous-Tannes with her young daughter, I think. The daughter is about 5 years old, maybe even a bit younger or older, I'm not sure. But she starts a chocolate shop in this town. And this is a very strict Catholic town, so people are not very happy with her starting this chocolate shop. But she makes friends there and starts to form these very intimate bonds. And it's kind of about the power of food, the power of chocolate and good food and friendships. And what I love about this book is the writing style. It's absolutely beautiful. It makes me feel warm inside. All the chocolate and the descriptions of the food are wonderful. And I've reread this once or twice now, and it would definitely be a book that I could reread endlessly, I think. Next up, there's a book that probably won't surprise anyone, and that's Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alira. This is a book that I reread quite often now, as it is already, because it is one of my all-time favorite books. It's a young adult novel about Aristotle and Dante, who meet one summer in, I think it's set in the 80s, but I always keep forgetting that somehow. It's set in 1987, I just checked. And Ari and Dante meet at a swimming pool in the summer of 1987 and they become friends. And it's about their friendship. It's also a coming of age story. It's about family as well. Ari has some things to work through with his family. Dante has a very wonderful family, and it's also about coming to terms with your sexuality. It deals with some heavy things, but ultimately it's just a very beautiful story about these two boys. And the sequel is actually coming out in October, so I'm very excited about that. And I'm also very happy that this is just hypothetical and I won't be able to only read these 15 books and I can actually read that sequel. But it's a beautiful book. I adore the writing style. I adore these two boys, and Benjamin Alira is one of my favorite authors, so I definitely had to pick one of his books. Next up, there's another all-time favorite, and it's Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. And this is one of my first favorite books, I think. This is another book that I read in high school. I think it's kind of the first classic that I read, and it definitely has some nostalgia attached to it for me because of that. This is about Heathcliff and Cathy. It's their love story, but it's definitely not a romance novel or a romantic novel, I think. It's a very tragic book about some very horrible people who do some very horrible things to one another. And like I said, it's definitely not romantic in any way. But I just love this book and I don't think I could do without it just because of the nostalgia. I think this is also one of the reasons that I went to study English literature at university, so I'm very attached to this book. Next up is another one that won't surprise anyone, and it's The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. When I first started making this list, all 4 of the books in the Wayfarer series were on this list, but then I figured I had to make some choices because 4 books in one series is a lot if you can only read 15 books for the rest of eternity, or my life basically. I do have another series on this, which are the last 4 books I'm going to talk about in a second, but I decided in the end to only go for The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet because the books in this series are not really sequels, they are companion novels, so they're separate stories all in their own. I decided to go for this one because I think it's my favorite. I read it in 2019 and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with the story. It's a sci-fi story about a crew of a spaceship called the Wayfarer, and they go on a dangerous mission, but it's not really about this mission. It's more about the characters, the character development, their relationships with one another, and I love books about characters and character development. I usually love those more than plot-driven stories, and I fell in love with these characters. I fell in love with the world of the Wayfarers series. I keep wanting to say trilogy because I said trilogy for a long time, and then in January or March or whenever the 4th book came out, so now it's a series. But yeah, this is one of my favorite books. I would not be able to do without it. This is another comfort read while also going into some deep topics, and I love it. So then there are 4 more books left. Like I said, they are part of a series, and I almost dropped them. They are The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. I don't think I really talk about these books a lot, but I love this series. I love Maggie Stiefvater. She's another one of my favorite authors. And I was debating for quite a while if I would add all 4 of these books to this list, because it's quite a chunk. 4 books out of 15. But I decided in the end that it would be nice if I would only be able to read 15 books for the rest of my life. That there is one series on there that not all of them are standalones, so that if I finish one of these books I could move on to another one and be part of this story for a longer period of time instead of just one book. I thought that kind of made sense, and out of the series on my shelves I think this one would be the one that I would want to reread until the end of time. This is a very popular series on BookTube as well, and I'm going to just hold one of the books because that's a lot easier. The story is set in the real world, but there are fantasy elements to it, progressively more so as the series continues. It all starts with Blue, who has to live with a prophecy that if she kisses a boy, he he will die. Because she is part of a family of clairvoyants. That's not really the right word. It's been a while since I read this. Women who can see the future, basically. She lives in a house with all women, her mother and friends of her mother and all these other women, and they all have the ability to see the future, but she doesn't have that ability, which always makes her feel like a bit of an outcast. And then she meets the Raven Boys, who are 4 boys who go to the local private school. At first she really doesn't like them, but then she kind of teams up with them. And these Raven Boys consist of Guernsey, Ronan, Noah and Adam, and they are on a search for a dead king called Glendower. And it has all these magical elements, it has beautiful writing, it has wonderful friendships, and found family tropes are in there as well. I just absolutely love this series, and it would be the series I would reread, I think. I looked at some of the other series on my shelves, but I think this one would be the one I would enjoy most for the rest of my life. So those are the 15 books that I would choose to read for the rest of my life if I could only read 15 books off my shelves. This list was really difficult to compile, and I think that if I look at this video like a month from now already, I will probably see things I would change and think of other books that I would add. But for now, as a time capsule, these are the 15 books that I would choose. So in a comment down below, tell me what's one book that you would definitely add to your 15 books if you would only be able to keep 15 books. And please like this video if you liked it and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more in the future. And have a wonderful day. Bye!